Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Maurizio Geri. He is a senior strategic analyst in international security with 20 years of experience between NGOs, academia, think tanks, and international institutions. He is also a reservist officer in the Italian Navy, where he works as a foreign policy advisor. Today, we will talk about the hybrid warfare that Russia and China are waging. Maurizio, you're a Navy officer and a scholar. Can you basically begin with the basics? What is hybrid warfare?
Thank you to having me here today. And let me say, as a background, as you correctly said, I try to bridge, let's say, my knowledge and my sharing with the people based on three elements: the academic approach, that is more the scientific approach based on data and facts, particular today with the post data and post science society. The military approach that is more pragmatic and strategic, because the militaries, they have to have strategies, means, ends, ways and means. And the media approach, let's say the sharing with the bigger public for debate, discussion, and sharing of narratives, in particular nowadays when we are in a fight and polarization in the media, right? But yeah, to say the basics is that, first of all, let me tell you that hybrid warfare is a concept that is ancient as the warfare itself. Because as I write often in my articles, already Sun Tzu, that was the famous Chinese general, right, 2,500 years ago, spoke about how to win the war without fighting. So the best way to win a war is subdue the enemy without fighting. It's ancient, but nowadays we have a scale, we have an intensity and the effects that are unprecedented. And why is like that? It's mostly because of our society. It's a modern society, globalized society that allow the hybrid warfare to have effects and scales that are unprecedented. And we have actors like, in particular, the dictatorial regimes of Asia, mostly, first of all, Russia, but also the others that are in the so-called axis of upheaval, that use it in a very constant way. Because in the West, we believe that peace and war are like black and white, two different status, two different realities. While in the East, war and peace are seen on a continuum. In particular, as I said, from the dictatorial regime's approach. So Putin is using this hybrid warfare since many years, not only since the invasion of Ukraine that has seen a lot of escalation of this hybrid warfare, but before, even before 2014, before the invasion of Crimea. And recently, the last few years, also Xi Jinping has been using this strategy. So practically, hybrid warfare is all the actions, both military and non-military actions, in the so-called gray zone or shadow zone of the conflict. Someone called them irregular warfare, unconventional warfare. Is a low-intensity conflict that can escalate in any moment and de-escalate, but is always in some way, let's say, in a sub-threshold way of conflict, because it's not a total war. It's a low intensity conflict that is a permanent state of conflict. So the battlefield practically is everywhere, is in the society, in the politics, in the economy. In the military world, we speak about hearts and minds. Before to fight or win wars, you need to conquer hearts and minds and pockets of the enemies. And hybrid warfare is in all these battlefield. Actually, we use the acronym of Dimefield. I'm using this acronym also for my publication. I'm sending in these days a book proposal to Routledge on a possible European strategy against hybrid warfare, and I'm using this acronym called Dimefield. So Dimefield stands for DIMEFIL. D stands for diplomacy, so diplomatic approach. Let's say the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, that has been used for China recently, particularly with Xi Jinping increasing militarization of not only of the space around China, but the media space and the diplomatic space, because his diplomats are using often a confrontational approach based on threats and escalation of narrative. And Russia the same. Russia is constantly, for example, threatening the nuclear, the nuclear escalation, and this is a typical approach of using diplomatic wars that are wolf warrior diplomacy, that are aggressive and confrontational approach. But the diplomatic element of Dimethyl is also using the diplomats as spies, as has been often used in Europe, again, from China and from Russia mostly. Russia, for example, is all documented, sending diplomats from Vienna, which is a non-state, country, Austria, to the rest of Europe to do covert operations, spying, subversion activity, etc. So this is the first, let's say, word and tool used by the nation state, because the Dimethyl is the use of all the national tools and power tools of a nation state. So the second element is I, stands for information, which is the info war, right? The most probably studied of the hybrid warfare, section of hybrid warfare, which is going from interference in democratic elections to disinformation, psych operations. As I said, they existed since a long time. Even in the Soviet Union, they called them active measures, right? The influence operations, etc. And nowadays, with the cyber attacks, are stronger and stronger with the, with the synthetic, for example, media, with the bots, etc., etc. Is becoming really something that is spread all over, and in particular towards countries that are a little bit maybe already divided in their society. Like, for example, my country, I come from Italy, and there are one part of the population, maybe not the majority, but one part of the population that is still seeing Russia as a good country, and maybe there is some pro-Russian approach from some political parties and some people, because we had in the past the biggest communist party of Western Europe. And for example, recently there are many documented actions of Putin regime, Kremlin paying some influencers, including in Italy, who speaks maybe Russians, and go on Instagram and speaks about the so-called maybe Russophobia of the West, saying instead Italy is more pro-Russia, etc., etc. But it's the same approach also of even if in less scale of China and other dictatorial or imperialistic regimes from Eurasia that wants to divide Europe. So the third element is the military, and it's not only the combat element. The military element means also, for example, the violation of airspace, as we see recently, in the North and the Eastern Europe, the attacks, let's say, to safe navigation of airplanes, both civilian and militaries, disruption of GPS, using military elements like using drones or using, to disrupt the airspace, etc. And the M stands also often for the maritime, because the maritime, as you said, I'm a Navy lieutenant reservist of Italian Navy, is increasingly the space where, together with space and with air, is under hybrid attacks, because in the maritime we have, for example, the pipelines, the data cables that are increasingly attacked by this hybrid warfare. Or, for example, we have the Russia shadow fleet that is evading sanctions, right? The fleet of commercial vessels that are so-called shadow fleet, because they are in the list of vessels that Europe considered vessels that avoid the sanctions on oil. And so, again, the maritime area is impacted by this. Then the E stands for the economic war that is can be considered quite ample, strong and big, because it includes, for example, the energy security, which is more my area. And the energy, as you know, is the motor of the economy nowadays. So we go there from, as I said, attacks to pipelines and infrastructures or even infrastructures, increasingly electric grids, because we go with the and with the green transitions towards the electric grids, cyber attacks to electric grids, but also the economic element is considering, for example, the frozen capitals, the sanctions. We have to remember that Russia has also a lot of European companies still in Russia, and so Putin in any moment is blocking and the revenues or the capitals that are there. And Europe also its intention is to use the frozen capital. Right? Recently, we are speaking about that. Then there is the F for finance, and is also related with the businesses that I said now, related with the economic world. Then you have the I of intelligence, and we go here from assassination attempts to European industry COEs, as we saw recently with the German defense industry COE that was there was an assassination attempt, to increase espionage, as I said, using diplomats or other officers of intelligence to do subversions actions in the West. And then the last one is the law warfare. Sometimes we call it law enforcement warfare with the police, like China having, there is also documented a lot about this, having some type of parallel states in Europe, including in Italy, when we signed the Belt and Road Initiative a few years ago. Now we are outside of that, but a few years ago we signed that agreement, and that allowed, for example, to have some officers of China to control the passport of Chinese, this was the narrative of the Chinese Communist Party. In reality, they were checking with the camera their dissident or whoever, and this is law warfare. Like other law warfare can be the intellectual property thefts that is typical of China. But avoid the legal accountability, the international legal regimes, etc. So let's say that with this acronym in the world of hybrid warfare, we try to include all the national power elements that are used by these rivals. I don't know if this is a good introduction for you, but we can go more in detail maybe with your questions and let me know what you think.
Yes, Maurizio, it just seems like hybrid warfare is everything short of a bullet being fired. Pretty much everything is up for grabs. Everything is hotly contested. You've given examples of Russia using its diplomats. You've also given examples of China using its wolf diplomacy. What else are they doing, especially against the West? I don't want to talk about what China would be doing with Taiwan. I just want to focus on Russia and China working together to unleash hybrid warfare on NATO.
Well, yes, on NATO and the European Union. As I said, I focus mostly on energy. When we talk about energy, for example, it's very clear, the weaponization of energy from both countries. One more related with fossil fuels, the other more related with the energy transition that we are having. Because, first of all, the weaponization of fossil fuels goes from price increases. This, I repeat, much before the invasion of Ukraine, to supply cuts from Russia side, manipulation of gas flows, attacks to pipelines, as I said, and these include also China, because in the Baltic Sea there has been Chinese vessels that have been destroying these pipelines, and saying that maybe is just by mistake, with the anchor that was used by mistake, but that's the problem of hybrid warfare, right? Is the deniability, the possibility of denying the attack, saying because it's very difficult to detect it and to attribute the responsibility when it's not a bullet fired, as you said. But China is doing, for example, recently is very famous and discussed the weaponization of the critical raw materials and the rare earth elements, with the cutting of exports towards US, towards Europe, that we are completely dependent on some of these rare earth elements and critical raw materials that are very necessary for the energy transition, for the turbines, for the batteries, for the solar panels, etc. We are completely dependent on China, and that's why European Union now is starting to react to that, to become more independent and decoupling from China. but also from Russia. Russia is, for example, sending its fossil fuels still to Hungary, to Slovakia, and so trying to divide, right, the European Union unity, saying, you have countries that are paying us, and now that's why Trump recently did the secondary sanctions, right, to these Russian companies in order to also try to fight this energy war. We thought that the weaponization of energy was something of the past, because of the green transition. In reality, is not. There is a recent famous article on foreign affairs from two professors from Harvard and Columbia explaining how the weaponization of energy is increasing. And the electrical grids, for example, are more, in one way, can be potential way to escape from this weaponization, because you don't depend from fossil fuel anymore, but they are also more vulnerable to cyber attacks, for example, and because they are centralized many times, the cyber attacks can have great effects. So imagine in the foresight on the military world, we do a lot of foresight, right, to the foreseeing the future trends and future risks. And imagine a possible attack to electric grid, like we saw recently in the Iberic Peninsula in Spain, the effects that can have. It can bring the countries back to 2 centuries ago. So the weaponization of energy is one of the biggest probably element of hybrid warfare, together with the weaponization of narrative discourse, to divide the rivals. Since the Roman time, we have the divide et impera strategy from the military side. So divide and conquer. When you are divided, you don't have a strong unity behind your militaries or your economy power. You can be weakened and won against. But there are attacks everywhere. As I said, there is a famous think tank here, the Center for Studies for International Studies, CSIS, in Washington D.C. And recently they made a report on 1/4 of attacks is mostly against transportations like train, vehicles, airplanes. I was in the NATO Public Forum, in The Hague last summer, and it was blocked, the airport in Amsterdam, from these cyber attacks. And as you saw recently, these attacks to transportation are increasing. With, as I said earlier, with the airports, and now with the balloons. I don't know if you read recently the balloons around the Baltic states, the drones, etc., etc. But then 1/4 is also the target towards government targets. There's officials, possible government offices, military bases, etc. 1/4 is against the infrastructures, so pipelines, fiber optic cables that are all underwater, and 1/4 against the industries, the defense companies, because the defense companies are the ones that are obviously defending Europe and supporting also Ukraine, so they are targeted increasingly by Russia and slowly also by China. So there is a whole of, we call it a whole of government or a whole of nation approach, as it's very spread out among different tools and different areas of conflict.
Right. You've given a very broad understanding of how hybrid warfare is done, especially when it comes to Russia. You've spoken about how they use their diplomats, they use their military, they use energy, and even social media, as you spoke about hiring influencers in Italy. But how has that changed since 2022? Basically, since Russia invaded Ukraine, has it exposed the limitations of their hybrid warfare capabilities, or has it emboldened them? And is Russia basically more on the front foot now when it comes to hybrid warfare tactics?
I mean, in some ways, it's both, because it emboldened, because Russia is doing more and more. As again, according to reports from think tanks, since 22 to 23, they even quadrupled the attacks, 4 times the number of hybrid attacks. And then from 23 to 24, they tripled these attacks, and they are expected to double again in 25. So the increase is evident. The increase of the number is evident. Also because, as I said, of technology transition that allow more and more of these attacks. but it's also exposed them too, because European Union finally and NATO, they are realizing that we are, as I said, in a permanent state of war, and so we started to react. There was already since years the clarity on that, but until we didn't have this escalation, we didn't have neither the maybe means to decide to react. And plus, it's also not easy because, as you know, NATO is a defense alliance, and Europe too. European Union is not an offensive alliance like can be seen the so-called axis of upheaval, right, in Asia between Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia that are constantly escalating the discourse, the military discourse, with not only with the military parades, but with the narrative. As I said earlier, talk about nuclear, talk about attacks, etc., etc. While we don't use offensive means, which is why it's more difficult to use to deter and defend and defeat, the 3Ds: deter, defend, and defeat the hybrid warfare. But since since invasion of Ukraine has been increased, also the attacks of hybrid towards Ukraine, as you see in the energy, for example, sector, and not only in the narrative and so on and so forth, in the diplomatic, trying to maybe through Hungary saying that Ukraine, should not enter in NATO, should not, for example, enter in the European Union, etc., etc., and to have these Trojan horses, inside the European Union. It's been emboldened, but it's been also more exposed. So there is a reaction from the West finally coming.
Right. So Russia is basically using multiple methods, and you've spoken about energy, which is basically oil and gas, and they have control of that. You spoke about military, and we've all seen reports of GPS jamming, GPS spoofing, airspace violations by Russian drones. I want to talk about China. How are they doing things differently? Is it similar in line with Russia when it comes to hybrid warfare, or does China rely on a very different strategy?
They are not very different strategies. As I said, there was some Chinese vessel, for example, implication in the Baltic Sea with the cutting of the cables. But they are doing even together with Russia. For example, there was recently joint air patrols between Russia and China off the coast of Eastern Asian democracies, meaning South Korea and Japan. So when you do joint air patrols in the coast of another country, you intimidate them. You try to project power. They do in Taiwan, but they do towards also other countries. There is online disinformation, for example, blaming NATO, on Ukraine, on the invasion of Ukraine, is typical of Russia, but is also typical of China. So there is online disinformation amplifying each other narratives. There is the weaponization of energy, as I said, the cutting, the supply chain or the value chain, because China is, limiting exportation and threatening to cut export not only on the supply chain of critical materials or rare elements, but the value chain of manufactured, things. We saw recently with the chips, the war with the semiconductors that, as I said, are very important for the military application, but also the civilian application of energy transition. There is the increased alliance between China and Russia, and as I said, also Iran and North Korea. North Korea sending troops, Iran sending drones. Everyone send what they can, but there is the so-called axis of upheaval that amplify each other efforts. So when we talk about China, we talk about China together with Russia, and obviously this is for now, let's say, it's not a value alliance like we are in the West. In the West, NATO alliance, European alliance are based on democratic values, are based also on common identities, common histories. China and Russia, they have transactional alliances because they are interested for their national interest and current interest, even if they have different history, different identities, different civilizations, and if there was not for a common enemy, they could have clash already, and some analysts foresee this clash in the future. But for now, they have this transactional and interest-based alliance that is escalating and multiplicating the effects of their hybrid warfare towards the West.
Right. Maurizio, you're an officer in the Italian Navy. That basically means you're part of NATO. What is NATO doing to counter Russia and China's hybrid warfare?
Yes, NATO and Europe also, and European Union are doing a lot. First of all, let's remember that NATO already since 2016 Warsaw meeting, the NATO summit in Warsaw, already said that the hybrid warfare attacks could trigger the Article 5. And until now they didn't, but since 2016 exists that, and since this year the Hague summit has been even reinforced this concept. And as you know, Poland trigger not the Article 5 but the Article 4, which is the consultation among the allies, but it is also impossible preparation of Article 5, so as a reaction. Then it made not only declaration but actions. So first of all, for example, in the Baltic Sea, since the beginning of this year, there is the sentry, the Baltic sentry, right, with the maritime assets, frigates and maritime patrols, aircrafts to protect critical underwater infrastructures. We have recently also the Eastern Sentry. This is more recent for the drones. This is for fighter jets, aircrafts, defense systems, etc. In the eastern side of flank, Eastern Europe, Poland and the Baltics, and Romania for coordinating these assets and deter possible invasion of drones from Russia. Then you have the center of excellence that are producing more and more analysis and strategies, because as I said, in the military world you need a strategy, means ends, clear ways and clear means, so also money and funds. And so also there is an increase of funds, because as you know, since this summit we have 5% of GDP pledge for the defense, to spend every country, each of the 32 member allies of NATO have to spend 5% of GDP for defense, and of which 1.5% is for hybrid warfare, because it's to protect infrastructures, for resilience, and for technology innovation, and including also defense technology and industrial base, which is also one chapter of my book, which is the common production of defense assets. Because as you know, 32 countries, they produce different assets, and these create problems for coordination, for interoperability, etc., etc. This is very important for the alliance. But it's not only NATO, as I said, it's also European Union. European Union, they have since this year, there is the Rearm Europe that now is called Defense Readiness 2030, which include also hybrid warfare, also the EU preparedness union strategy to respond to war and hybrid war. So the whole of government approach, as I said, and besides the declaration and the policies, the clear goals and the ways, there are also the means, because European Union, already the European Commission said that we can spend up to 650 billion euros for national defense budgets for the 27 countries of the European Union. So we can, escape. There is the Stability Pact that, force the countries to maintain the debt under the 60% of GDP and the deficit under 3% of GDP. But because there is this Stability Pact escape clause, we can, for defense reasons, go out of the 60% of GDP and the 3% of GDP for deficit. So up to 650 billion euros we can spend as a whole European Union, and 150 as so-called SAFE, Security Action for Europe, which is the EU financial instrument for loans that the Commission and Ursula von der Leyen proposed in the EU defense readiness. So there are a lot of actions, and in particular in energy, as I said, that's my area, and the European Union is doing the Repower EU since already 2022 to stop completely the Russian, energy by end of 27, including for the countries that are currently, importing the Russian fossil fuels. There is the Critical Raw Material Act since 24. This is more recent and require also to have more independence from China. That will take more time because, as I said, we are practically completely dependent from this country. There is the Energy and Raw Material Plan since this year, since 25, to secure the supply chain and stop these dependencies. It's and the list of vessels of the shadow fleet. As I said, the vessels that are avoiding the sanctions. We have a list of vessels, but again, it's difficult also to board them because you have to have clear suspicions, and international law has to be respected. And so, recently, you probably read about the French case when they, boarded one of the Russian vessels
Right.
of the shadow fleet, but there are not many of them that are boarded, and so there are a lot of reactions from these both these alliance, the NATO alliance, which is a political military alliance. Let's remember, is before a political alliance among democracies, and then a military alliance, and the union of the Europe, the European continent that is stronger and stronger today. Also thinking about possible expansions, like the recent president of the council said, in the Balkan states, but also with Ukraine, that hopefully will become a European Union country soon. So there is a reaction, but it's not easy, as I said, because the hybrid warfare is difficult to be detected and to be is deniable. There is a possibility of deniable in every moment, so it's difficult to be attributed, and has difficulty because you need also offensive means, not only defensive means, to win the hybrid warfare. And in this way, maybe we are more backwards respect to our rivals that are dictatorial regimes, and so they don't need to be accountable to the people. They have an advantage also on there. And here it comes my academic approach. Let's say I studied my PhD in the US, and many seminal works here explain how the democracy, differently from dictatorships, they have to be accountable to the people. And there is a famous book about the logic of political survival of Bueno de Mesquita, a professor, in 2003. The selectorate theory explained that the dictatorial regimes, they have to be accountable to a small elites of military or oligarchs, and so not necessary to be accountable to the people. You can wage a constant, permanent state of war without respecting the rule of law, not only at domestic level, but also at the international level. While for us, we need to respect the international rule of law because we are democracy, because we are accountable to the people that elect our governments. And so we have some disadvantages in the hybrid warfare, but they can be managed because we are starting also to understand the offensive means. And we can talk about that later if you want, offensive campaigns without escalating to total war.
Right. I want to play devil's advocate quickly. So on one side, you've got NATO and the EU saying that Russia and China work together when it comes to hybrid warfare. You talked about the joint air patrols around Japan and South Korea. But then if you look at Russia and China and how they perceive things, it's pretty much it's a mirror, basically. They say that NATO is expanding towards Russia. China says that the US and the West is supplying weapons to Taiwan, putting their fighter jets in Japan and South Korea. So they are basically being encircled by the West and NATO. Don't you think we're in a bottomless spiral at this point when it comes to hybrid warfare and how both the sides perceive each other as constant threats?
Yes, this there is again here I want to bring a little bit of my academic hat, right? There is this idea that through cooperation and through positive means, through globalization, these countries could have become democracy, could have become stable, and respect the rule of law and the international liberal order that they themselves also signed, with the creation of the UN Chart at the end of the Second World War. But who has been, the first to violate this chart? Not only with the invasion of Ukraine, bluntly, but even before. Again, this in the international relations theories, you have this liberal theory that believe that with economic exchange, and we did that, right? We included the China and the World Trade Organization, allowed China to grow 10% per year in the economy. But what did China did with that money? With that, increase the military expenditure and militarize the region around his area. When we come to military expenditure, China increased its military expenditure 7% in this year. They say, but again, is a dictatorial regime, so they don't have to be accountable to the people, and that's the issue. They say they have 250 billion budget for the military expenditure, but the international think tanks, CIPRI, from Norway, from the northern countries, estimate 350 billions, and US suggests that is much more. Russia, imagine the increase of Russia recently is so much. They have around 150 billion dollars of expenditure in the military. And again, the expansion of NATO. Here we are talking about democracies. We are talking about former Warsaw Pact countries that choose, when they were liberated by the Soviet joke, to join freely, because every country has a sovereign nation, because the sovereignty is the most important thing. You have a sovereign decision to join an alliance of democracies instead of staying with the failed, communist or statalist regime. So when we go to international relations theory, we have this idea of idealism that through exchange, socialization, dictatorial regimes will become democracies. But it never happened. It's just wishful thinking. And the same, the liberalist theory. We had the NATO, for example, Russia Council, and created also through Berlusconi government in Italy. And who violated this council? Russia itself, with the militarization, with the actions of military actions against former, Warsaw Pact countries, including, first of all, Ukraine. Obviously, they had the agreement of never invade Ukraine, and after they gave up their nuclear power, and that's the result you have today. And the same China, you have Taiwan that is constantly threatened because in their narrative Taiwan doesn't exist. It's just under the Communist Party. And so they say either we get it with the good or with the bad. Xi Jinping, when he was elected, he launched the famous Belt and Road Initiative, right? And what did he say? The world has to fly as a flock of geese. But who is the first goose to dominate this flock of geese? In his vision, is China. So there is a dominant approach, hegemonic approach, that wants to destroy the international liberal order. Who signed the agreement before, just weeks before the invasion of Ukraine, saying that we are the real democracies in the world. We are alternative to the West because we are superior. China and Russia. There is the text is there by Xi Jinping and Putin saying the world that exists is not fair, but they are the ones that destroyed that liberal order, that UN chart, through the using of military means for solving international disputes. And here it comes again the realism theory. So the realist theory, one of the three, the most scientific, the most evidence-based theory in international relations, it tells you that the nation states look for survival, but differently from democracies, imperialistic dictatorial regimes, they look for expansion of their spheres of influence because they need resources and expand their power, because the international system is anarchic. There is no world government. So the big fish eat the small fish unless you are a democracy. In the democracy alliances, democracies, they don't fight each other. There is France and Germany, they don't fight among themselves since 80 years. While dictatorial regimes, they tend to fight among themselves unless they have a common enemy, like in this case. So finally, European Union woke up through US practically, because US realized that the cooperation, the globalization was making dictatorial regimes winning the competition. And so we reduce now the cooperation, the allowing the free riding to the international to the dictatorial regimes in the international system, the free riding and the international, as I said, the intellectual property thefts, the illegal competition, economic competition they were doing, etc., etc., saying now we have to go towards competition, meaning invest in our infrastructures, invest in our critical raw materials, invest in our brains, invest in our resources, markets, etc., etc., in order to regain our growing, because otherwise the dictatorial regimes, thanks to our markets, they were using those money for waging wars to us, as Russia did with the oil and gas, and China is doing with the rest, with the critical raw materials, and not only, in general, with the market that we opened to them in the last 25 years.
Okay, so basically everything is militarized, and we're at constant warfare. That's the biggest takeaway that I have speaking to you. Energy is part of warfare. Social media is part of warfare. Of course, military is part of warfare. My final question to you, Maurizio: what next? Is it going to be AI? Is it going to be space? Is it going to be both? Or is there another domain that we're not really even aware of right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I said, the military world, differently from the political decision makers, we look also to foresight, right? So we are passing through two gigantic transitions. One is energy transition, one is technology transition. They will reshape the face of humankind in the next 25 years and the rest of the century. So technology is a big potential for improving lives of people, but is also a big vulnerability. You can leverage AI, quantum computing, autonomous systems to wage new type of warfares, as we saw increasingly with, for example, the drones, the autonomous drones, AI drones, etc., and create more and more, dual-use technology and technology, sophisticated strategic tools to embolden dictatorial regimes and enemies to the international stability. But the fact of the matter is that we have more and more also participation of the people, participation of the population, at least in the West, because the people in Russia and China, they cannot have a word, but in our countries, even if they are targeted by, as I said, synthetic media, no, because they are targeting you individually, not as a group, like a country or something, but individually, with making you a bubble and manipulating your critical thinking, your ability to understand what is black and truth, what is the truth and the false, black and white. But at the same time, we also have more awareness of the people of these subtle ways of waging war. And so the people is what is going to change to support the democratic West, because you can have the technology, you can have the problems of inserting malicious malwares in your computers, but at the end of the day is your critical thinking that matters. Even if you have AI, I'm pretty sure that our sapiens species has been always survived and will survive also these two transitions. And by the way, the fact of for example, the climate change that was is now reduced, like in a narrative, right, for supporting this energy transition and technology transition. The fact of weaponizing energy and technology again could work more than the fear of climate change in the West to speed up this transition, to speed up this both this technology and energy transition, and maintain in the West, in the democratic world, the advantage, the edge of superiority, like it happened in the nuclear era, right? When the nuclear power was developed during the Second World War and after the Second World War before in the West. And so I think the innovation, the creativity brought by the Western world towards the Eastern world is the advantage that we have. The people, inclusiveness of the people in the decision making and in the transition will make the difference. And in the future, as you said, also space is becoming in another area, and that's why now we have the new space race. Everybody wants to go from China, from the Gulf countries, also the new regional powers. But the fact of the matter is that there is a process of improvement and empowerment also of the people through individual participation, and that's what will matter for the future.
Right. Well, Maurizio, speaking to you, what I have learned, and I'm sure our global audience has also learned, is that hybrid warfare is not going away anywhere. In fact, it's only going to increase, and nations are going to be in a state of constant warfare. And that is going to lead to more participation of the civil society, basically to a point where we're constantly in a militarized state of mind.
In some ways, you can call it like that. Let's call it more the militarized competition state of mind, in which you have to be aware that not all the actors are benevolent, and not all you read and see is truth. So you need to wake up as individual and go back to what Socrates said. I like the Stoicism and the ancient Greek Roman philosophers. Always have a doubt, always make a question, and through the questioning, bring back the discussion and the debate, like you are doing with your stream. And thank you to have me here.
On that philosophical note, thank you so much for joining us and for speaking to Fair Observer and for sharing these wonderful insights.
Thank you. Bye.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.